Welcome to American Education FM, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Brooks. Ladies and gentlemen, hi. Welcome back. Okay, first of all, I'm just going to mention this geopolitically. I know there's plenty going on. There's no way I can get to every single thing. But I do want to mention this. I watched the Oval Office meeting with Donald Trump, the president, of course, and the president of South Africa. It was fantastic. The way that he set him up and knocked him down was perfect. And then, of course, the way that he exposed the division in South Africa at the exact same time was also perfect. And then, of course, allowing some of the representatives of the South African government even speak. And then show, of course, their communist ties and their Marxist ideology as well. It was all perfect. Everybody got to see it on full display. So as we all know, he invited in the South African president. And then behind the couch, actually sitting on the couch, he had some of the government's representatives there as well. They did not look pleased in the slightest. And then behind the couch, you had Ernie Els and Retief Goosen, friends of Donald Trump, who of course are native South Africans, and they fully understand exactly what's going on there. They have family members who live there. They have a residence there, at least one. It's their home country, of course, and they know everything that's been going on. They also know the racial division that exists and the cultural division that exists in that country. South Africa's, again, as one might expect, anybody who has a brain anyway, would fully understand that that too is one of those countries, like all countries, where their history has been a complete and utter lie. Certainly as far as its interpretation here in the United States. So again, the very general aspect of basically what people hear here in the U.S., which is not accurate at all, is that whites colonized South Africa, took it away from blacks. Nelson Mandela was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and after he died, things turned into chaos, and then people have basically been living in poverty ever since, and so on and so on. None of that's true. Not a word of it. So the way that it works is that the Dutch, the English, and other northern European countries settled in South Africa because it was unsettled land. There were not people even living there. Certainly not on the coast or the coastal regions, and that's the way that it was. And that was well over 400 years ago. And then, of course, you had Central African tribes slowly start to make their way down, and then they went, what's with these white people? And then, of course, you had turmoil and you had chaos. Same thing with Rhodesia. Same kind of story. But of course, Rhodesia, or what was Rhodesia and is now Zimbabwe, was a little more embedded, of course, within the continent of Africa. So a little, I guess, easier to take and easier to surround. And then, of course, wipe out the whites within that particular country, and that's ultimately what ended up happening. The problem, again, with South Africa is that it is and has been communistic. Ever since, again, the pressure has been placed over the years on the white culture that exists there. And, of course, the white farmers and everybody else. But the entire point is that who taught Africans communism? And we know who. Again, Jews created communism. The Jewish lobby created communism. This dates all the way back, of course, well past the Bolshevik Revolution. And again, this is part of what they do. They travel from country to country. They tell people that violence is the only way, that you need to confiscate land, thereby you confiscate money. And then again, if you need money, you can either play the victim and ask people for free money, or you can sell off the land to investors and you'll receive money that way, and a number of other things. Of course, trafficking children, running guns, drugs, the whole thing. But in that particular meeting, again, with Donald Trump, he set up the president perfectly. As we all know, he showed him the videos. He showed him exactly what was going on. He was rubbing his face. He was sweating profusely as he's sitting there. He's not even looking at the screen most of the time, while Donald Trump is looking at the screen the entire time. He knew exactly what he was going to do to set up the president of South Africa. He knows exactly what's been going on in South Africa. And you can't be friends with Retief Goosen and Ernie Els and not have a pretty good idea as to what's going on. And again, they described it. They described Ernie Els and Retief Goosen did. They described their feelings of their homeland and the concerns that they have. And Retief Goosen's brother owns a farm there, and their family has a farm, and their family works it, and they live behind an electric fence in an effort to try to protect themselves. And they've been attacked before, and people have been killed on their land before, and a number of other things. And it's beyond heartbreaking. And then, of course, you had all of the excuse making. Well, we need money, the president of South Africa says. We need drones. We need surveillance. We need this. We need that. As it turns out, of course, they've been using our surveillance for quite some time, but they've been using it against whites. And they've been using it against anybody who aligns themselves with whites in South Africa. They use signal jammers on those farms as gangs of blacks in order to, again, jam the signals so that the farmers can't communicate with one another using a cellular device, or they can't send a signal to another farmer at an adjacent farm and say, we're under attack, come and help us, or we're under attack, they're coming for you next. Where do you think South African blacks received those signal jammers? Did they make them? No. They can't make a boat. So they didn't make signal jammers on a backpack. They got them from our government. They got them, of course, through Mossad. Want to hear about the Mossad connection? Here's one. Again, this dates back to the old days of Nelson Mandela and the Jewish lobby and the Jewish mob, and Mossad, of course, taking over South Africa and destroying it and killing endless innocent people. Jewish involvement in the Rivonia trial and the abolition of apartheid. This says the following. The Rivonia trial took place between the 9th of October in 1963 and the 12th of June 1964 in apartheid-era South Africa after a group of 10 terrorists who aimed to kill whites were arrested on the Lillisleaf farm in Rivonia. It says the farm was secretly used for meetings of the no way I get that right. Some African name, sorry. The MK, as it was apparently known, the newly formed armed wing of the African National Congress. It says the trial took place in Pretoria at the Palace of Justice and the Old Synagogue. So the lie surrounding all of this, as it clearly says, is that there were white people among the terrorists arrested. As it turns out, that's not true. They were Jewish and they were black. It says those arrested at Rivonia, a Bob Heppel, Heppel, Hepple, Jewish, James Cantor, Jewish, Dennis Goldberg, Jewish, Harry Wolpe, Wolpe, Jewish, Lionel Bernstein, Jewish, Joe Van Mackay, African, no way I get that name, also partially Jewish, Andre Malangeni, African, another Jewish individual, Raymond Malaba, Nelson Mandela, Walter Sinsulu, also African, Musa Mula, part Jewish, I believe, Arthur Goldrich, also Jewish, and then an Elias Mosadali. Anyway, it wraps up and says none of the terrorists arrested at Rivonia were white. They were indeed 6 Jews indicated in blue parentheses who pretended to be white, unquote. So again, the president of South Africa is involved in all of this. And throughout that entire meeting, he said it multiple times. He said, the one thing that we learned from Nelson Mandela was that if you want to communicate with people, you have to sit down at a table with them and you have to listen to each other. The part he left out is that the thing that we learned from Nelson Mandela is that if you aren't given what you want, you kill people. That's the part he leaves out. Again, Nelson Mandela was a terrorist, trained by Mossad. They didn't invent communism in South Africa as South African blacks. I just went over it before as to why that's the case. They weren't the ones that created it. They taught Marxism and communism to African blacks. And it is in their DNA now. The woman, for example, standing behind the couch, who spoke, she was one of the economic advisors to the president and to the country. This woman is a full-blown communist. And she got up there and she started saying that violence wasn't about race, that it had nothing to do with race, that it had everything to do with poverty, that violence was just about poverty, not about race, that there are blacks that kill blacks in Africa and they do it based on poverty. So we need money because all of a sudden, if everybody has a job, then everybody will stop being a murderer. That's ridiculous. It just means that you're giving a murderer a job. like the job is going to distract them from wanting to murder somebody. Well, I would kill you on a normal day, but given the fact that I have to be at work at 11, and I'm almost on my lunch break, the fact is that I don't have time to cut your head off right now because, I have to go to work. I don't think so. That isn't the way that it operates. But again, these people are so dumb that they don't understand that they're talking to individuals who have studied communism and Marxism, and they know exactly how they speak, they know exactly how they sound, and they have it all figured out. That's why they got set up, just to get knocked down. If I was Donald Trump, I would threaten the president of South Africa like nobody's business. I'd say, we're going to invade your country. We're going to save as many people and innocent people as we can, in particular the whites who are clearly being targeted. You're acting like, of course, they're not being targeted when in fact they are. You're acting like you're trying to protect them in some way when clearly you're not. So we're going to protect them. We're going to allow them to come here. And then, in typical, frankly, continent of Africa style, if it's just left with blacks, they'll just kill each other. It's that simple. There will be a full-blown revolution in South Africa. No whites will be present because they'll be smart enough to buy a plane ticket and get out of there. And then they'll just slaughter each other. Again, if that's what they want to do, that's their business. I don't think we need to intervene. But we should intervene, again, when it comes to protecting the innocent individuals in that particular country, frankly, just like we should be doing in Gaza or anywhere else. That has to happen. So it'll be interesting to see what was said in that particular meeting. I bet there were no punches pulled. Wouldn't be surprised if there was a little bit of shouting. And we don't owe them anything. And there really isn't anything that they can give us that we need. It really isn't. I mean, it's a sandbox. They don't have anything that we want. They don't have anything that we can't get ourselves. Again, the president of South Africa brought up rare earth minerals. Well, we have those, and we can get those for you. The problem is they don't have the equipment. So who do they use to get those rare earth minerals? They use child labor. They use child slaves. They pump them full of drugs, and then they send them down a muddy hole in order to pull out lithium. And that's where, that's exactly where we get our batteries. So every single time a person buys a lithium battery, you're driving around on something that the hands of an African child dug out of a dirty hole. That's basically it. It's not complicated. The other thing that's interesting, too, about African culture, regardless of the country and the continent of Africa, is they don't know the word maintenance. It is quite literally not in their vernacular, regardless of the language that is spoken. They don't have a word for maintenance. Which means when something is built there, they don't know how to maintain it. It's a language barrier. It's a cultural barrier. This is why South Africa looks disgusting now. It didn't used to. It used to be gorgeous. Again, Rhodesia used to be gorgeous. It's not the case anymore because they don't know how to maintain things. Even when they're shown and taught, they still just don't do it because they don't understand maintenance. And this was proven, actually, by an African himself, a black African. I played it on my war videos, where he's talking to two other Africans from two other portions of the continent of Africa. And he's saying, again, you have the word create, don't you? And they said, yes. And you have the word invent, don't you? And they said, well, yes. And they said, what about maintain? And they said, what is that? And he said, the word maintain, to maintain something, do you know what that is? And they said, well, we know what that means in English. And he said, exactly. Is there an African word for maintain in any African tribe or culture? And they said, no. And he said, exactly. That's why, again, whites can come over to a particular country in Africa, build something, and those who live there cannot maintain it, which means it gets destroyed over the course of time, either through, again, erosion or a lack of maintenance. It really, again, communism and Marxism are the scourge of society, and all it's done is permeate every single aspect of every terrible environment that exists, including, of course, in the United States. Certainly the school environment, that goes without saying, but it even has these individuals working within those environments believing that their ideology is the way, and it isn't. Their ideology is just that. It's a bucket full of shit and ideas that they think work just because they say them, which is why they're always trying to reinvent the wheel instead of arriving at a sole conclusion and a sole response that will solve a problem. If you solve a problem, the problem should never exist anymore, hence you solving it. Just like when somebody, again, like I said in the last episode, any school district or organization says something like, well, we're fixing things and we're in the process of fixing things. You only fix things when they're broken. You don't fix them when they don't need to be fixed. So in summary, again, the meeting was a good one. It was fantastic. And I certainly hope that in any future meeting again with any of these individuals who get invited to the White House, that Donald Trump flat out throws them under the bus. Just one after the other. Bring in the television, lower the lights, play the video of them being a complete lunatic, and just show it to them. And again, they're even throwing it right in the face of the media and showing the media that they're not reporting on the things that they need to be reporting on. I just love it. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. And then, of course, again, you hear all the individuals, criticizing Donald Trump and saying that he's anti-white and he's anti-this and he's not standing up for whites. That couldn't be further from the truth. He's openly said he doesn't want the innocent killing of anybody. And yeah, of course, the media is not reporting on it. Why? Because they're owned by the Jewish lobby and they're murdering whites in South Africa. And they're not going to report on that. Why? Because the Jewish lobby is in control of South Africa. This is the problem. Now they want to have some G20 summit down there. If I was Donald Trump, I wouldn't go. I don't think he's going to go. He said he's not interested in going. There's no reason for him to go. They should send an envoy down there to, again, recruit more whites to get out of South Africa. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents, but, they don't care what I think. Not to mention, I don't know all the ins and outs, and I'm not privy to all the intelligence, so I really don't know all the ins and outs of what's really going on, but at face value, it seems like an unwinnable situation. Certainly, again, for the innocent individuals who are living there who are being slaughtered and being targeted. So, it's not a good situation, but it is the current situation. Okay, with that aside, get a load of this. This was brought to my attention by our favorite California lawyer, AJ Gochik. And I'm going to read this thread here. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't been paying attention to the Sean P. Diddy Combs trial. Because frankly, he's guilty as sin. I think everybody knows it. And that's good enough for me. And he's going to go to jail probably for the rest of his life, as he should. And there you go. But as it turns out, there is an Oxford high school from Oxford, Michigan connection to the Diddy trial. And here's what AJ said. He said, quote, Sean, have you heard about the victim, quote unquote, in the Diddy case, Cassie Ventura? Her mother-in-law, Pam Fine, Parker, in parentheses, was a counselor at Oxford High during the Crumbly shooting. But she wasn't at work on the day of the shooting, beyond strange. Now, just as a quick little review, Pam Fine was one of the individuals who was in the know regarding the behavior of Ethan Crumbly. And at the time at Oxford High School, she was designated their restorative practices coordinator. So in this particular article dating back on a while ago, I'll just say, this is from courthousenews.com, Michigan school officials must face accountability. It says Crumbly's former teachers who reported his behavior were a Jackie Kubina, Allison Karpinski, and Becky Morgan. Were also dismissed from the case initially, along with Pam Fine, the restorative practices coordinator for Oxford schools. What are the odds? He went on here, he said the mother is a nutcase. She destroyed a black coach's life on frivolous assault charges. When asked why she didn't leave the football coach if he was so physically abusive, Pam said that the coach gave her flowers and things. And then he said crazy. We went on and talked a little bit about Pam Fine. He said the husband had a strange role as dean of Oxford High, but he's not mentioned in the 563-page report. Maybe he got the job afterwards. Maybe it's not even him. Maybe he's dead. He said you were way over the target. You said she was one of the most responsible in the Crumbly shooting. And she's named, of course, in a civil lawsuit also. He then said Pam's daughter-in-law, Cassie, got a $20 million settlement from Diddy and another $10 million from the hotel, where, of course, she was battered on video. And it said, hate to blame the victim, but I think she consented to it all, including loving the lifestyle. I said, yeah, I would agree with that. It says Pam, he also said, of course, she was hardly the victim. Let me correct that. And I said, yeah, she certainly loved the money. It goes on, and he said Pam used fake assault charges on her black college football coach to launch her own career. And again, if anybody's curious, Pam Fine is white. So there's that. Okay, moving on here. One more education-related thing. I wanted to make this quick little update here because it, again, continues to prove how stupid these people are. You may recall that in the last episode, I brought up how 2 board members were emailed by Scotty King in the town where I live, who is the husband of another board member. The one board member that they don't like, of course, because she's holding them accountable and asking questions, and they, of course, hate that. Like little children that, steal candy and never get caught, they'll just keep doing it over and over and over again, and then, of course, that behavior gets worse with age, as has been the case here. In those posts, which, of course, the 2 of them decided to take to Facebook, and they openly admitted that they're communists, which I thought was funny. And they openly admitted again that they seem to think that anybody trying to hold them accountable is somehow... I don't know, trying to, what did they say? What did Matt Wyatt say, who also works for Miami University? He said that these people fashion themselves as being members of the Weather Underground or being as important as them or as important as Che Guevara. So in that comment alone, one board member not only outs himself as being a communist, but he thinks that we want to be as good as them. No, we aren't communists. We don't want to be. Not ever. In fact, communists are my enemy. I despise them. Including, I might add, the people who think that they're communists. The people, even those, and this is how, again, confusing and dumb they are, who would say that they're not communists when they yet do all the things that communists do outside of actually killing somebody. But they don't know that that's communists' end goal. And the actual end goal of communism is that they themselves, as the useful idiot, end up the victim of the very thing that they have been perpetuating. Case in point. Again, Matt Wyatt and Pat Mead, the 2 board members in the town where I live, 2 of them. They, of course, took to Facebook and said that Scotty King was lying and that, oh, wait, look, they did in fact... He did, in fact, email us before the board meeting, the morning of the board meeting, but the email went into our spam folders. Therefore, we could not detect that he had actually emailed us, which is why we didn't respond. And then, of course, they make an excuse and say he's not supposed to be emailing board members these concerns. He should email the superintendent. Again, constant deflection, rationalization, you name it. Here's where it gets funny. Matt Wyatt took a screenshot of his email that Scotty King sent him, and it clearly says at the top of the actual email that it went into the spam folder. Now, who put it in the spam folder? Here's the funny part. The screenshot that Matt Wyatt took, he took a screenshot of all of the open tabs that exist on the top of his web browser, which means he was looking up the email online and not through like an email application. The email that he was reading his Talawanda K-12 school district email through was his Miami University email account, which means he has Talawanda emails being filtered through his Miami University account, and then he reads them through there. So if he himself didn't put it in his own spam folder to try to make a point that was false and fabricated, of course, on his end, the point is that he's using his Miami University email address to read his Talawanda school district emails, which means all of those emails would end up in his spam folder. But if he'd have just used his Talawanda school board email and looked it up, he would have seen that it was in his inbox. So in an attempt to basically say that the reason that he didn't see the email was because it was in his spam box, it wasn't really. Not in the spam box of his Talawanda school district email account. He's completely retarded. Again, in his attempt to out somebody for some wrongdoing, he actually exposed himself as being the person who is engaging in the very thing that he's actually criticized Don King of doing. And then, of course, Pat Mead took to Facebook and said the exact same thing. It went into my spam account. Well, is that your personal account that it went to? Because you're filtering your Talawanda school district emails through your personal account? Or did it go to your spam folder in your Talawanda account? It's impossible that it would go into the spam folder of a school district school board member's email account because it's the email of a parent that you already have on record, which means it would go right into your inbox. They're pathological liars. And every time, again, that they try to do something to make it look like they're the innocent victims in something, it just shows that they're actually fabricating their own victim status. Now, with that aside and their complete retardation put away here just for a moment, let me read you this comment. This is a comment that was made on my BitChute page, which I thought was a perfect summary of the episode from, I believe it was last Monday, where I was going through what transpired during the last board meeting. Here's what they said. And again, it's just a perfect description. They said, quote, "You know you lost the narrative when you have to go the character assassination route and you don't address the argument at hand. That was hard to listen to. Those teachers, quote unquote, are the culmination of everyone gets a trophy culture. They speak like children, and their unwarranted self-importance is astounding. I wasn't fully convinced before, but now I am fully on board for burning the public school system to the ground. But I guess it's an intentional failure by design," unquote. Yes, all of that is correct. Their display a week ago, on Thursday in that board meeting, was emblematic of endless behaviors among school employees all across the nation. Just blind seals clapping at the zoo, not knowing what they're clapping for, not having all of the evidence at hand, and yet their powers of perception and observation are absolutely in the gutter. Because if they had any sense, they would have looked around the room and said, wait a minute, there's hardly anybody here. This room is not filled, and even if it were, that would not be the vast majority of school employees by a long shot. Which means, why are we here? Are we actually making a bad decision by being here? Should I not be associated with this? Is this going to look bad for me in the future given the fact that I don't have all of the facts at hand? as to what's going on. They don't even think nor consider any of that. It's beyond embarrassing. But like I've said a million times before, you give these people an inch, they'll hang themselves with it. They'll find a way. Is that kite string? Excellent. Let me tie a noose and I'll hang myself. And then they just do it. And you're going, no, that's kite string. It's not for you to hang yourself. And they go, shut up. I know what I'm doing. And then they just do it anyway. It's incredible. These are the people teaching children. These are the people around children. And these are the people making excuses for violent behavior among children, and then, of course, not holding them accountable. Now, let me give you another example. Again, this is more example of the federal civil war that is ongoing and continuously taking place. This was, again, just from today as I'm recording this. It says a federal judge appointed by Joe Biden has blocked President Trump's attempt to shut down the Department of Education, ruling that the agency must remain open and that terminated employees must be reinstated, unquote. Again, these judges are overstepping their role and responsibility as a judiciary wing of government. There's only one entity that is in charge of the Department of Education, and certainly its funding. Now, yes, that has to do with the legislative branch, no doubt about it, but the purview also falls under the executive. That is well known. Again, Linda McMahon, for example, can fire anybody she wants because she's been confirmed. Donald Trump appointed her, and that's the end of it. She can empty the building if she wants to. And yes, of course, an act of Congress has to get rid of the Department of Education permanently, and that needs to happen, and that needs to happen quickly. We shouldn't be waiting around 2 years for that, or certainly at the midterm elections. It's a little long, although I've openly said on the record here that that's probably going to be the case. We're going to have to wait for that to actually happen, which is unfortunate. But these judges don't get to do this. They're outing themselves one at a time by just giving them the opportunity to out themselves because they clearly don't know what the law is. They don't know about separation of powers. That's the entire point here. So, again, they're not going to be reinstated. A judge can't hire and fire people. That's not going to happen. These people don't want to get caught. Certainly at the Department of Education. They don't want to get caught laundering money, child trafficking, drug running, sex perversions. Again, we know that they've been renting out hotels, carnivals, drinks, dinners, all of this stuff. What does anybody actually think that's for? Is that some professional development setting that they're all engaging in, or are there a few kids hanging around? And that's exactly why they're spending all of that money and have spent all of that money, of course, that was uncovered by USAID, including, again, directly coming from the Department of Education. It's child trafficking, ladies and gentlemen. It's a giant child trafficking operation. In fact, it's not a bad segue, leading right into jab talk here. Another child trafficking operation, the WHO. They passed their pandemic treaty. This particular document, of course, is one that I've read on the show before, gone through at great length over the past, I'd say, couple years. And there's a particular thread here I want to read through rather quickly. Again, this has to do with, of course, us not complying. As, of course, we can't do that, and we didn't the first time, and, of course, we won. It was the people who did not comply were, in fact, victorious in all of this, and yet we were the losers also because we had to watch all of this. So, theoretically, nobody won, because everybody was lied to. But in those documents, as it lays out here in this thread, it openly stated again that they were disappointed that more people didn't follow, and by more people they mean everybody, and at the exact same time, they looked to fill the gaps regarding the moves that they did not make or the ones that they did make but they didn't push hard enough. Specifically, of course, when it came to lying to everyone and infiltrating every avenue with false propaganda, shutting down as many people as humanly possible, and basically to hell with your Constitution in the United States. You have no rights because when it comes to a quote-unquote pandemic, everybody's in this together. And all of that nonsense. So this is from Lewis Blackpool, at Lewis_Blackpool on X, and they said the following here: the WHO pandemic agreement has now passed. There was no parliamentary vote, no public debate, and no referendum. This thread explains what was agreed to, how it happened, and why concerns about sovereignty, accountability, and global governance are growing. It says on the 20th of May, 2025, WHO member states adopted the organization's first international pandemic agreement at the 78th World Health Assembly in Geneva. The treaty was adopted by consensus, not a formal vote, which means that governments, including the UK, signaled approval without domestic scrutiny. It goes on, it says the treaty is designed to address failings exposed by how countries handled COVID-19, quote unquote. It outlines legal commitments to share pathogen sample and genetic data, distribute vaccines and therapeutics equitably, strengthen international surveillance, that's not good, comply with WHO-led emergency declarations, and develop global digital health certification systems. There's another digital ID right there. It says this agreement is not limited to pandemic response. It's based on the WHO's One Health, quote-unquote, framework, which views humans, animals, and environmental health as interconnected. Critics, rightly, argue this broadens the WHO's scope, allowing it to influence food systems, climate policy, agriculture, and land use under the guise of pandemic prevention. It says while the WHO cannot override national law, the treaty creates binding international obligations. Governments may use it to justify emergency laws or sweeping public health powers, while shielding decisions behind the language of international compliance or global coordination. Says the WHO is not a democratic institution. Its Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus, or Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, doesn't matter. Still a loser, should hang by the neck until dead. Anyway, it goes on, it says, is not elected by citizens but appointed via a process dominated by diplomatic negotiations between member states. His past controversies, including handling of early COVID outbreak and ties to China, have fueled concern about impartiality, among other things. It says the WHO's top funders are not primarily governments. As of 2023, its largest contributors include Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Gavi Alliance, UNICEF, the European Commission, Germany, and the United States. Private foundations now shape global public health priorities without any electoral mandate. It says among the more contentious provisions of the treaty are proposals to implement a pathogen access and benefit sharing (PABS) system. This would allow WHO to access pathogen samples from any country and redistribute pharmaceutical products under equitable frameworks, potentially overriding domestic vaccine supply chains. It goes on, it says the treaty also encourages states to adopt digital health documentation systems, which could evolve into permanent digital IDs tied to vaccination or health status. While presented as public health tools, such systems have been heavily criticized by civil liberties groups as intrusive, coercive, and open to mission creep. All true. Goes on, it says several countries abstained or objected during the drafting phase. These included Poland, Russia, Italy, Iran, and Slovakia. So that should pretty much tell you who our allies are. They're right there. It says their stated concerns include loss of national sovereignty, lack of clarity, and the risk of unelected institutions imposing policy. No kidding. It says in the UK there has been virtually no parliamentary debate over the treaty. No formal statement has been made by the Prime Minister or Health Secretary. Despite the agreement's long-term implications, the UK has participated in negotiations rather quietly, bypassing public scrutiny. It says the adoption of the treaty reflects a broader trend, the shift from nation-state governance to transnational marginalism. Under this model, decisions affecting millions are increasingly shaped by technocrats, NGOs, foundations, and UN agencies, none of whom are directly accountable to voters. James Burnham's The Managerial Revolution explains this, and it shows a picture of that book, The Managerial Revolution, What is Happening in the World by James Burnham. It starts to wrap up here. It says, this is not a conspiracy theory. It is a structural change in how global policy is made, particularly in moments of crisis. Of course, it's not a theory. It's a fact because they write it down. There's endless documentation that proves this. A lot of it's on my website, of course, under the Government Documents tab. It says what COVID began, the WHO treaty formalizes. It says emergency governance, centralized authority, and the use of global health as a gateway to broader control. It says if democratic governments can enter binding international agreements on pandemic policy without consulting their citizens, then who governs in a crisis? The answer increasingly is those you cannot remove from office. The WHO pandemic agreement is a landmark, not just in public health, but in global governance. It centralizes authority, weakens national sovereignty, and embeds unelected influence at the heart of crisis response. The public was never asked, unquote. Depopulation. That's the agenda, always has been, will always be. And again, we are the last line of defense. All this nonsense, as you may recall me saying, when sheriffs would always come out and say, we are your last line of defense, you can come to us for help and blah, blah, blah. No, we are the last line of defense. We have our own brains. We have our own ability to think. If we follow the sheep into the slaughter, it's going to be too late for us. We don't have to be one of these ants marching. We can do whatever we'd like. Stay out of doctors' offices, do your own homework, do your own research, look things up on your own. Again, the entire health insurance scam has been revealed in, of course, recent months, if not the last few years. The entire thing is a complete charade also. You pay less if you don't have health insurance than if you pay for health insurance that you never use, and then you get ill, and then you end up paying more just because you have it. Again, endless examples of all of this being fraudulent, all of this being a giant money grab. And of course, if they lose money, then they have to increase their illegality to make more money back. So they're going to keep doing that too. If we withdraw our participation, it doesn't mean that other NGOs won't give to the WHO in order to influence Americans. They still will. They'll target individual doctors and still target individual companies and other people. It's going to get ugly, but again, our non-compliance is the last line of defense here. Yes, it would help if we actually had a government that fought back against these people, and I have no doubt that those people are in place. Again, RFK is certainly one of them. He doesn't like the WHO, and why would he? I don't think the head of the FDA and the head of the CDC are fans. They certainly shouldn't be, not now. The old ones were, of course, because they were being paid to go along. But times have changed. And again, more people know now, and more people know to not ask their doctor what they think they should do about their own body. They can figure it out for themselves. So, again, they can play all the globalist games they want. They can rush all of it through because that's what they have to do, because they've been planning to do this for decades, if not centuries. And now, as a result, this has finally passed their little club, and whatever. It has no impact on us, certainly not yet. But time will tell. But this, again, is one of those examples of the Civil War. It's between the knowledgeable and the unknowledgeable. And only the knowledgeable will survive in moments like this. It's usually the case in just about every situation. We now, of course, have Andrew Cuomo being investigated by the DOJ regarding his New York nursing home deaths testimony and reports about that, of course, and the way he handled that entire fiasco. And then, of course, Biden officials knew about potential COVID-19 vaccine risks and took steps to downplay them. Scathing Senate report says. Yes. We've been aware of this since the very start. And now it's blowing up in everybody's face, and all of those, of course, who had absolutely no idea what was really going on and can't comprehend the level of evil at the government level. They, of course, think that evil exists when a party that they disagree with is in power, but they don't understand that, unfortunately, certainly in years past, they've been two heads of the same snake. And they fell for it like a lot of people fell for it. Too bad. They should be a little less trusting, you'd think, in the future. But with that said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave it there. Have a great weekend as always. Happy Memorial Day to everybody out there. And I will catch you on Monday. Peace. Thank you for listening to American Education FM. Make sure and check out AmericanEducationFM.com for more information. Take care and God bless.